bring a little bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes." Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And he said, "There in the tent." Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Sarah and Abraham were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of the woman. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have grown old, and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and said, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "Oh yes, you did laugh." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
And from the Gospel according to Matthew. Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in the synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to cure every disease and every sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, also known as Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Cananean, and Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions: "Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. As you go, proclaim the good news. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received without payment, give without payment. Take no gold or silver or copper in your belts, no bag for your journey, no tunics or sandals or a staff, for laborers deserve their food. Whatever town or village you enter, find out who in it is worthy and stay there until you leave. As you enter the house, greet it. If the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet as you leave that house or town." May God add a blessing to the reading of the word. Okay, another congregational participation sermon. When you hear the word evangelism, what comes to mind? Words, images, anxieties. I can't hear, so. Anxiety, okay. Okay, tracts on a street corner. Billy Graham, okay. Our choir, okay. Linda's voice. What other words? Me, okay. Right back at you, you. Deacons, okay. So a range of things, not all negative, which is good. Sometimes we react sort of harshly to the term. Words that came to my mind as I was pondering: revivals, gospel, good news, bullies, turn-offs, heaven and hell, eternal life and eternal punishment. Evangelism is a word that carries a lot of baggage for us. For some reason, I got talking to the second service folks last Sunday about my first blatant encounter with evangelism, thanks to a camp counselor I had when I was in junior high. She was with all understanding, proud of her identity as a born-again Christian, and she described herself that way to everyone that she met. And she also took a time to tell you that if you weren't, you should be too. She regaled my cabin mates and me with stories about walking the streets, standing on street corners in the metropolitan area where she lived. She just didn't hand out tracts, though, Janet. Their style was to carry Bibles and to go up to people and hit them gently on the head with the Bible and ask them whether or not they'd been saved. And if the answer was no, then she and her friends would proceed to bombard the passersby with warnings about what would happen to them if they failed to commit in the moment to the particular truths she and her friends were espousing. She claimed to have converted many people to faith with that strategy. I'm a little skeptical, but in this day and age, seems like you'd be taking your life in your hands to do that. But her style was not particularly successful with my cabin mates and me, much to her chagrin. It was a long 5 weeks for all of us. Several of my peers boldly challenged her. My theology wasn't terrifically well-formed at 14, but I did know instinctually that her understanding of God and mine were occupied two different planets. But because she spoke with great authority and great confidence about what she believed, and because she scared the heck out of me most of the time, I just tended to avoid her. But we were a captive audience, especially on the nights around the campfire when she would entertain us with stories of the rapture and the torments of hell. Well, her idea of fun was my definition of hell. It was a really awesome summer. The word evangelist comes from the Greek euangelion and means essentially bearer of good news. The very essence of Christian ministry, right? And the very reason for the church's existence is to be and to do that very thing, to bear good news, to share with others the mercy, the grace, the forgiveness, the healing, the new life, and the hope that we ourselves have experienced in Jesus Christ. And that's why I really, really struggle with the strong arm tactics of the camping evangelist, because nothing she ever said sounded or felt like good news to me. Matthew's gospel, in particular amongst the four, identifies teaching, proclaiming, and healing as the tools of evangelism. In the several stories prior to this one, Jesus has been traveling widely, teaching and healing many people. He doesn't ever perform miracles for the sake of show. They're not to impress the crowds or to display his power for the sake of power. It is his compassion for the crowds, Matthew tells us, that motivates him. This deep sense of care and empathy and concern for the needs and the pain and the suffering of others. And as those crowds and those needs multiply, Jesus does what good leaders do. He commissions others to help with the task, to evangelize with him. He doesn't see the world as his alone to evangelize. To spread the good news to others, he chooses these 12 disciples. Disciple means learner. And then he instructs them here and throughout the gospel on how to act as they take the message on the road. He and his ministry are always, then and now, the model and guide. The guys he entrusts with the holy endeavor are an odd bunch, and it is not just a bit of trivia that he includes the name of these 12. Some are not particularly impressive nor obviously logical choices for the task. A few are related by blood and identified in the story by who their father was. That was kind of the traditional Jewish way of making introductions. Matthew is the only one singled out for his occupation, tax collector, which likely made the original audience of the gospel recoil in disgust, because that meant he was a pawn of the Roman Empire. Simon the Canaanian, also known as Simon the Zealot, was called out for his political leanings. And in this case, it was the exact opposite. It would have suggested that he was an enemy of the Roman Empire, trying to overthrow it. Their pairing would be comparable to, say, having, Trump and Hillary and Bernie supporters all occupying the same pews. Wonder if that ever happened. Clearly, old separations and hatreds are less important than the mission of God. Judas is introduced as the one who betrayed Jesus, a title he bears to this day, and a nod perhaps to the reality that not all of the chosen will choose well. They weren't a very diverse group in that they were all male, all Jewish, all residents of first century Palestine, and all of the working or lower class. There were, at this point, no women named as disciples. There were none of the elite. There were no foreigners. There were no political or religious leaders among them. But clearly, they demonstrate that no special pedigree is required to share the good news. In fact, the choice of them, this particular bunch, indicates that Jesus is pretty welcome to use and welcome anybody into the new community. The mission for these 12 interns is completely unreasonable, except that he does give them the authority to heal. And armed with that, he sends them out to do radical and outrageous things, to proclaim the good news, announce the coming of the kingdom of heaven, cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. What was Jesus thinking? And if that's not daunting enough, they have to do all of that in an unfamiliar locations with strangers who may be at the very least resistance, but could also be threatening confrontation and bodily harm. Maybe that's why he sends them in pairs, you think? Evangelism in Jesus' style is done by the buddy system. And Jesus equips them for their work, but not with a lot of stuff. He directly instructs them to leave at home their luggage, their money, their security blankets, their electronics, their distractions, their rewards cards for the finest inns. Instead, they are simply to trust in the ones who await them wherever they go, to rely on the goodness and hospitality of strangers who may or may not be friendly and reliable. He instructs them to leave where they are not welcome, to shake off the dust off their feet, and to go when it's time. Because according to Jesus, being a disciple isn't about forcing faith on people who are resistant and unreceptive. Initially, Jesus sends them only to fellow Jews. Later in the story, though, after Easter, Jesus expands the mission field to include all nations. But now, they're just supposed to minister to their closest neighbors. You might notice that nowhere in the instructions does Jesus give them simplistic slogans or secret formulas for guaranteed success. 40 converts in 40 days. He simply compels them to do as he does, to move and to be moved by the people in need he will meet. Responding in compassion means their job isn't limited to just meeting the religious needs of their constituents. Naturally, if they follow Jesus' example, they'll pray for people and comfort them and free them as they are able from the burdens of illness and infirmity and possession. But Jesus also feeds people who are hungry, and he befriends people who are lonely, and he restores people who have been cast out into community again. And these things can't be done from a distance, right? You don't phone in being a disciple. It only happens when you meet people face to face. You make connections, you build relationships, you tell and you listen to stories, and you drop your assumptions about one another and trust that God can do a new thing in your lives, not just the needy people's lives, but in your own needy life as well. Thomas Long is a prolific author and preaching professor. He's frequently been named one of the most effective preachers in the English-speaking world during the last couple of decades. He says that any notion that the church ought to quit getting involved in non-spiritual matters and get back to its real job of preaching and saving souls completely misses the point. Preaching the gospel and saving the souls, he says, means grappling with disease and the demonic, with social segregation and the powers of death. It means wrestling with issues of public health, health care, with racial and social alienation, with the powers of domination and oppression that bleed the life out of communities. As if weekly worship and building maintenance and air conditioning and vacation Bible school and a strong youth program weren't enough for the church. We need to take on disease and the demonic and racial and social alienation and the powers of domination and oppression that bleed the life out of our communities. And the answer would be yes. Though this story is about particular people in a specific time and place, clearly the story is timeless, right? God continues to give us, the church, the responsibility of proclaiming and teaching and healing. But that means that God also continues to equip the church to do just that, to give us the gifts, the spirit, the empathy, the compassion, the space, the resources that we need. So why subject ourselves to the trouble, the aggravation, the embarrassment, the potential rejection of leaving the comfort of home and sanctuary to be with, to speak to listen to learn from, to minister with people we don't know in places we wouldn't ordinarily go? You received without payment, give without payment, Jesus says. And it all boils down to this. We who have been recipients of the grace and mercy of God have an obligation, a holy duty, a mandate to tell others about it, to offer that same grace and mercy to people who need to hear about it, remembering we don't go alone, and that Jesus will enable us and empower us to do the things we cannot do on our own, to reach the people we cannot reach on our own. And this is good news, the good news that we deliver when we go out into the world and meet people where they are. So thanks be to God for that. Amen.